you know, you're in New York. You don't ever think about going to another country, to the other side of the world, and hearing people loving the same music that you love.
Yeah, we were filled on drugs. Yeah, it was off our tits, going fucking ballistic. But that's what it was about.
There was a time when there wasn't a term house music or techno music or warehouse or garage or happy house or all this other shit. It was just music.
What we're gonna do right here is go back.
In the late 80s, house in America was still an underground music. In the country of its birth, radio stations were firmly segregated and played either rock, country and western, or R&B and hip-hop. If you liked up-tempo dance music, house music, you had to go to a club to hear it.
House is a big part of club culture today, you know, and for the last, 15 years. House music, all of it wasn't on the radio, you know, but this was a scene that was developing all around the world, you know, that started in Chicago and New York. It's just a feeling in the clubs that you get from these drive-in tracks, these great tracks, great songs, great feelings, some of them had great lyrics. They weren't all instrumentals.
I remember every person in the club vocally responding to records. Imagine that. Imagine being in a club, even if it's like 500 people. When everybody's vocally responding to almost every song the DJ plays, that's energy, man.
At clubs like the Paradise Garage in New York, DJs were making converts to the house scene.
But I had a friend that turned me on to it. He was a house head, so he would have all these people over there that hated house, but he'd be playing it and he'd be jacking, you know, dancing like Move Your Body, Rockies. Just were looking at him like, this guy's retarded. And it took me a long time. It took me like late '88 for me to really start getting into house. But I caught on to Todd Terry.
Known to his fans as God, Todd Terry brought a hard-hitting hip-hop sensibility to the basic house sound.
It was like, I like house now. I only like Todd, but I like house. It was just energizing. It was just like, your cats would be just bug into it, you know? So that was like, that was my introduction to house. Gritty, raw, in-your-face house. I used to see guys, I thought they were gonna rip off their dreads. They were like on the floor like this, like almost to the point in tears, over a record. No drugs. You know what I mean? That's house.
Todd Terry's quick-fire samples and rugged bass lines forged a blueprint for house that's still being followed today.
Most people's style, even like if you want to look at who's hot, like Daft Punk or like anybody that disco loops, Todd did that first too. So disco looping, Todd did that first. Let me put a rock sample on a house beat. Oh, Todd did that already too. You know, it's not much left Todd hasn't done.
While Todd was undoubtedly a pioneer, it was only on the other side of the Atlantic that house had a mainstream audience. Over in the UK, by the end of 1989, house was top of the pops. Italian producers Black Box sampled disco classic Love Sensation and got a model called Katrina to mime Lolita Holloway's vocals.
When we finished the record, Miko said, what do you think we shall call the record? Well, she says, right on time, all the time, so that must be, you know, it's the chorus, so we must call it something like that. Yeah, but how do you spell it? And then I said, well, it seems clear to me, she says ride on time, R-I-D-E. So in fact, I realized a few years later, obviously speaking a bit about English, that she wasn't saying right on time, she was saying right on time.
It hogged the #1 spot for 6 weeks. But away from commercial chart hits, British producers were already creating an awesome range of new house styles.
What were the skies like when you were young?
They went on forever. We lived in Arizona, and the skies always had little fluffy clouds in them.
Ambient house mixed down-tempo beats to new age electronic music.
And when it would rain, it would all turn. They were beautiful, the most beautiful skies, as a matter of fact. The sunsets were purple.
Club DJs found this pretty quick in the late 80s with acid house, is that you couldn't really play a whole vocal because people would just come down and they'd think they're listening to Radio 1 or something, you know. So they'd have to play the instrumentals, but every now and again a tiny bit of vocal, either sung or a little bit of spoken word, would just give you a kind of little rope from the heavens to say, okay, this is something to look at.
Layering different sounds on top of each other. Layering different sounds on top of each other.
We would just play rainforest sounds over old ambient music and then spin in some Marshall Jefferson or some of my house stuff as well. And create a whole evening of seamless ambience, you know.
The Orb's little fluffy clouds introduced chilling out to the rave generation.
The skies always had little fluffy clouds in them, and they were long and clear, and there were lots of stars at night.
And so we just put it together, and suddenly, you know, it sounded just great, you know. A lot of people came up to me afterwards, a couple would run up to me and say, well, who did that? That's the most beautiful voice I've ever heard in the world. Where is she? You know, where can I meet her? And I think what part of the fun of the record was that finding out that it was Ricky Lee Jones was the last person you'd expect it to be. It's not Chucky's in Love, is it?
But the most unlikely take on house was to be the result of its collision with rock and roll.
Kids from Salford formed a band, and the fact that they were to change history, I don't think people are conscious that they're going to do that. I don't think Elvis Presley was conscious he was going to do what he was going to do. You know, he just did what he did, and they just did what they did.
Formed in Manchester in the mid-80s, the Happy Mondays started life as a typical indie rock band.
At the time, in Little Houghton, which is part, you know, like an overspill of Salford, they built the most huge, gigantic superstore, right, called Scan. It sold everything from the sports goods, you know, to guitars, to amplifiers, to records, to food, right? But basically, they had it set up like a fucking greengrocer's. A mirror there, and fucking 20 old ditties on the till. We used to go shopping with our mum and dad, right, and we'd purposely put our fishtail parkas on. Darts down there, they'd sold air rifle, air guns, down in your lining. They had these country and western amps in, right, which was fucked. And you could literally get away with carrying these things out.
But it was during the recording of their second album, Bummed, that the Mondays started to absorb the twin influences of house music and ecstasy.
20 or 30 of our friends had come down to this little club. So we gave the DJ some new records to play, right? Put a pill down his neck, and we're all dancing like this and having a great time. And then there's all these squaddies, and all looking like that. What's your fuck